So we're going to be talking about budget this week, and we're going to go over the basics of creating a annual budget. And I'm really tailoring this to people who are maybe running a small business, FCC providers or preschools, not large organizations. Large organizations are most likely going to have an accounting department or consultants or people who can help you with this. If you are in a large organization, you maybe don't deal with the day-to-day of an accounting system. Knowing the basics of your budget is going to be helpful for you. Knowing how much you can spend, you don't want to spend too much. You don't want to get in trouble with accounting for having your expenses uh, go over the income that you bring into your program. So knowing what you're spending and knowing what expenses you're bringing in will be really helpful for you professionally. And then some of you are going to be running larger preschools where you might have to defend your budget to a board, even though you have an accounting department. So this is really tailored towards the small businesses, the FCC providers, and maybe the smaller infant, toddler, or preschool programs. But everybody is going to be helped by knowing the basics of creating a budget. So I want to talk this week about budgets. And I have linked to two chapters from Gail Jack's Business of Childcare. It's a fantastic resource for looking at budgeting, enrollment, and fee structures. And I've put those chapters up on Canvas for you. But she says a sound budget, well used, can also move your program in the direction you have envisioned while helping you maintain the financial integrity of your program. So in previous weeks, we've talked about types of programs and then our mission statement for how we think children should learn and how we envision our programs supporting children's learning in classroom environments. So I maintain that a good budget is going to help you hit those goals of providing fantastic educational experiences for children, but it's also going to help you with the financial integrity of your program, which is really important because you are providing the livelihood for your employees, for your teachers and your support staff. So you have a double burden and a double responsibility if you're an employer, that you have to help children learn, but you also need to make sure that you're paying for the salary and benefits of the people who work for you. So all programs, even if you're small, very simple, are going to be benefited by basic financial management, the knowledge of financial management, and then some sort of skills in this area. Even if you are a completely state-funded or federally funded program, there are still pots of money that are paying for the children's spot in your classroom. Just because you might not take in cash or checks from parents doesn't mean that those spots are not being paid for. They're just coming from alternative funding sources, either located within state, county, or federal governments. And let's say that you are taking in profit, but you have an accounting department. You're still going to be benefited by having some idea of financial management to make sure that you are still running your program appropriately. The accounting department's going to be really happy with you if you are balancing your books and you're providing them with the record keeping they need in order to keep the organization running and paying for everybody's salaries. So some of the things that we're going to be talking about is just the basic ideas of a budget, which in this case is don't spend more money than you collect. And then also additionally tracking actual expenses, knowing your income, making changes. And then I'm also just going to give you some vocabulary if you're not familiar with it about profits, overheads, fundraising, some general information like that so that you feel comfortable when you're looking at budgeting materials. Short clip on budgeting tips for small businesses. I like YouTube and Khan Academy and places like that because you can search any kind of management or small business term and you'll have kind of a illustration of how it is. So if words like expenses or accounts or budgets make you have a little bit of panic because you're not used to dealing with money, but it's something that you're going to need to know as a small business owner, or professionally you want to take the next step in your management chain. Then familiarizing yourself at home as you can, by just looking up short clips that visually explain to you how to set up a budget. That might be really helpful for you. So this just kind of links to a nice cute little video, but you can search whatever you want as far as issues that you don't understand or things you need to learn more about within budgeting. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a budget cycle, and then future planning. So what you're going to do is you're going to create an annual budget to forecast the year ahead. So a budget calendar is going to include dates, deadlines, costs that are due. For example, maybe your liability insurance is due every January and August, then that's going to be added to your budget calendar. Because that's the type of thing that's going to remind you to pay it, first of all, and then also track your expenses for that month. If you have a large bill due on those days, on those months, then you're not going to have as much petty cash, let's say, for materials, and you're going to need to plan accordingly. Typically, a fiscal period is July 1st to June 30th, which is different than our calendar year, or a lot of times within preschools, we kind of set up like a September 1st to kind of mimic the school districts. So it's really up to you. You can set up any 12-month period you want, but typically for accountants, they do like a July 1st to June 30th. And then there's ticklers, and this is a very common accounting term. And really what a tickler is something to tickle your memory. So it's something to remind you to do something, pay something, or do something by a specific date, such as open enrollment for benefits could be in January. So that would tickle your memory that you need to change insurance plans if yours got more expensive, or re-enroll new employees, that type of thing. So when you're using a budget as a planning tool, you're going to track your actual expenses and then compare it to your monthly budget. So what I just talked about is an annual budget. So then you need to track your actual expenses next to that, and make adjustments as you need fit, seeing how much you make in your income. So what I mean by that is, like, let's say your program closes for 2 weeks at Christmas time. Thus, you take in less income for that month. And so you need to track the different incomes that you make. So maybe you make a lot, maybe you make less at December because you close, and then maybe you make less in June and July because families go on vacation, and they maybe don't pay, they only pay you weekly. So you need to track when you bring in different income versus your different expenses. So if Christmas and June, July are rough months for you, also if you had expenses due like insurance or liability on that month are different, then you're going to need to plan in advance. So if you bring in less income but you also have to pay more out that month, that's something that you're going to need to know months in advance so that you can make appropriate financial plans for that. So there's typically two types of expenses: fixed expenses and variable expenses. So a fixed expense is going to occur regularly, and the amounts are typically the same. So for example, your space, the rent, mortgage, or lease is going to typically be the same. You typically enter into a 5 to 7 year lease on a space, and in that time, the rent should not change. Utilities are one fixed expense that do change. It occurs regularly, and that's why we consider it a fixed expense. But for example, if you are running a center in Escondido, in August, you're going to be running your air conditioning 24/7 to keep the school cool enough so that children can inhabit the space. But in January, February, or March, you're not going to have to be running your air conditioning as much, so there's going to be less charges on those months. But because it occurs regularly, it's considered a fixed expense because you have to pay it every month. Additionally, your insurance, liability insurance, property insurance, workman's compensation insurance are things that you have to pay every month. You also have to pay taxes. And then you have to pay salaries and benefits. And we're going to go into detail on that because that is by far always your largest fixed expense. And then there are other expenses that you might have to pay depending on the program that you run. And this would include like a contingency that you might build up every month or audits that you need to pay for. And then your variable expenses, they don't occur regularly. So it changes according to the need or your want. So your equipment and maintenance on the facility that you have, on your playgrounds, the materials that you have. So your supplies are also included in this, your classroom supplies, tables, chairs, learning materials. Then your office supplies, copy paper, maintenance on your copy machines, computers, and then cooking and cleaning, buying enough cleaning supplies, bleach for the classrooms, cooking if you're providing food, the materials that you have, your saucepans, your oven maintenance. So all of those things are variable depending on when things break down and when you have the money to replace them. And then transportation as well. If you do provide transportation as part of your program, the maintenance of your van and keeping it up and running. Then marketing as well. If you print out brochures, periodically having to restock those and pay for the costs of printing. Then there's other miscellaneous fees, legal and professional fees, field trip fees, parent education. You know, if you are providing monthly parent education, you have to consider in the costs of paying staff if you pay for childcare, if your staff is teaching your parents, and then also like printing costs from those materials. Same with training for staff. So if staff training or staff meetings take place after office hours or school hours, providing pay for those hours, and then any costs incurred with having guest speakers or printing out additional paperwork. So I want to break down your staff salary and benefit expenses because this is going to be the largest proportion of your budget by far. And I just want to go over a little bit more detail. So first of all, it depends on your staffing needs. So larger programs are going to have a lot more support staff. Typically programs that are over 80 or 90 to 100 students are then going to need more administration, more teaching staff, and more support staff, cooks, substitutes, professionals, consultants, janitorial staff, that type of thing. And since you are bringing in more money from enrollment, then you have more discretionary cash in order to pay for support staff. So benefits. Benefits are really important. They include health care, paid leave, sick and personal, and retirement. So right now, as of July 2015, employers only need to pay 3 days of sick leave, and that's mandatory for all employees, and then it has to be on our pay stub. We talked about that 2 weeks ago. I really believe deeply that all programs should have a long-term goal to provide health benefits and paid time off. Turnover rates are affected by the quality of income, and we know that this is a lower paying field, and benefits available. And so I've linked to a study from 2012 called High Turnover Among Early Childhood Educators in the U.S. From childresearch.net. It's an interesting read, and it describes a lot of factors related in turnover rates, and a lack of support is actually quite high. But the biggest one is low pay and benefits. If you are just starting out, you've just opened up a center, it's probably not financially feasible for you to offer health benefits, paid time off, or retirement. But I deeply believe that that should be a long-term goal. So you have a vision, a mission statement about how children learn. Children can't learn without quality staff that is retained within a program. So you're supporting how children learn by taking care of your staff. And I deeply believe that. So benefits should be included as part of your staff salary and something that you're going to pay out every month. I also want to bring out that some programs, and I've worked at these before, offer reduced childcare costs. So if you have a teacher who works as your preschool teacher, then she would get a reduced childcare cost for maybe her infant who comes to work with her. that's a really great program, and it helps out, especially if we're a lower paying field, how teachers are actually going to get to work when they have to pay for childcare themselves. Um, but that needs to have a monetary value and be included in your budget, because that is money that you're losing. If you are giving her a 15-20% reduction in her childcare cost, then that has to be absorbed within your budget somehow. So in the last couple of slides, we were talking about where all of your money goes. And first and foremost is the salary that you pay your teaching staff and your support staff. But then there's the other incidental costs like copy paper, sod, new rattles for the infant room. There's myriad costs that you're paying on a yearly, monthly, and daily basis. So how are you going to regroup all those costs? By bringing in income and revenue, and tuition is going to be the largest source. So even if you're state or federally funded, you are still getting money for the service that you provide. So I'm talking about tuition generally in what you get for providing childcare, either from parents or from alternative funding sources. So when we're talking about bringing in income, the biggest thing is enrollment. So Gail Jack has this quote: if the key to value of a property is location, and childcare, the key to financial viability is enrollment. So uncollected tuition, decreased enrollment, those are all going to be concerns, because you're never going to run at 100% enrollment. If you can have 76 children in your classroom, in your center, you are probably only going to have 65 at any time. Children leave, families move, they can't pay anymore, somebody gets laid off, mom decides to stay home. There's a lot of different reasons that children leave programs. Just like we have high turnover for our staff, we typically have high turnover for the children in our program as well. So how are we going to get higher enrollment? Later on in the course, we'll talk about marketing and marketing our program. But right now, we're going to talk about staff scheduling and shifts, and supporting our goal of high enrollment by scheduling and shifts. So previously, we had spent time thinking about children, staffing, breaks when we were talking about school age programs. And you guys came up with a scheduling program for an AM PM program. Right now, we're going to talk about shift work and how it applies to when we have staff available for the children in our program. And this can be in just a general sense, like typically programs during the Christmas holidays, when staff are going on vacations and such, they typically won't pay out for subs, knowing that, on December 23rd, even if she has 5 staff members out, she's probably not going to have full enrollment on those days. The director herself might have to step in to do breaks or provide some care in the classroom. But you typically don't have to pay out for a sub, knowing you won't have full enrollments on around the holidays, or even in summer, your enrollment will dip down as families take vacations. Also is the idea of daily, when children are arriving and when they are leaving, and how you staff appropriately. And we're going to talk more about that on this second slide. So staffing for enrollment, and I've just kind of put 2 columns about this fictional school with infant, toddlers, and preschoolers, and then the staff members that she has. So as teachers, you've probably had to spend time counting ratios of children and then throughout the day. One, just to make sure that you're maintaining appropriate and adequate supervision. And then also you typically turn those paperwork into your supervisor, and then she's analyzing it. So she's looking at, if we're open at 6:30, but we're not getting most of our kids until 7:45, 8 o'clock before the families go into work, then we don't need to have full staff members between the hours of 6 and 7. And then if you're looking at the staff members that you hire, typically you're hiring a mix of full-time, part-time, and then split shift employees in order to meet the needs of the program and when the children are arriving and leaving. So can you move staff hours to utilize lower or higher enrollment numbers? Because that would be ideal. If you don't need your staff members to be there at 7, but you need everybody at 9, moving hours so that you have enough staff to meet the needs of your program while also not paying staff when you don't need them. An important thing to keep in mind is you need and want to provide enough hours for your paid staff. So if your job contract is, that you're paying for 40 hours, you're needing to give them generally 40 hours of work in order to honor that job contract. Unfortunately, though, sometimes positions have to be eliminated. Great situations are if they need to be created, you're consistently hitting your enrollment and you need to bring new staff on. But unfortunately, sometimes with programs, you can't meet the needs of all the employees that you have. And you need to be upfront with the staff that you are possibly going to have to eliminate. And you should be responsible to them in helping them find additional work if you're no longer going to be able to pay for their services and you can't honor the employment contract that you entered with them. Then also looking at ways that you can get more children in your program before you had to. Can you get on more resource and referral lists? Can you use social media to market your program? How can you get more children in so that you can make more income so that you can pay the expenses that you have to? So other revenue streams beyond tuition and enrollment, like I said, it's unusual in that we don't have a lot of revenue streams, but some that we might have are programs that are partially or fully funded by the state or federal government may also receive the food program funding. And we're going to talk more about food budgeting in other weeks. But this is just really to reimburse you for food costs. A lot of times people consider it an income. I really don't. That in my mind goes straight back into my food program and my cooks. But other sources of income might be registration fees, material fees, and then food provision fees. So if you're not funded by the USDA, but you provide meal services for the children, parents typically pay more in their tuition in order to cover that. Then there's what we consider soft money, and this is not really something that you can depend on. Because it's very variable, like writing grants and winning grants, or the success of the fundraising idea. It's considered soft because it's not something that you can count on regularly. So it's not something that you can depend on to pay your employees. I consider it like play money. So typically that money that I would make from fundraising specifically would go to like cash incentives for staff or extra money for the classrooms, for materials, things like that. Although if you are winning grants, you almost always have to stipulate where that money is going to go. For example, I wrote a grant years ago and I got $50,000 and it wasn't like, woohoo, I'm going to give everybody a raise. It was, woohoo, $50,000 to fix my plumbing and my floors. So you really can't consider this money part of your income, but it's nice to know that you have the option of trying to make some additional funding money by writing grants or having some fundraising. So in the past couple slides, we were looking at our fixed expenses, our variable expenses, and then how we bring in income, which is our tuition. And now we need to look at all of the data that we've compiled, and we need to analyze it, and we need to balance it. So really, at the most basic, when you look at it, you don't want to be spending more than you earn. And so it's the same with your household budget or your personal budget. If you're getting $2,000 a month in from your job and you're spending $3,000, you have a deficit, and that's a problem, and you're going into debt. So what you want is to not have a deficit. So we want to take in more tuition income than what we spend on salaries and taxes and liabilities. So that's why it's so important that at the beginning of this PowerPoint, we were talking about writing a budget for the upcoming year. Because if you write that budget and it's going to cost you more to run your center than you get in income, then that's a concern. Because really what you want to do is plan to have a small surplus every year. You can consider it a contingency plan for unseen costs, um, or just in general, you're planning to have a surplus in case your enrollment does go down, and you have to eat that throughout the year. Because there's lots of little things, like I mentioned before, earthquake damage, and you're not going to receive insurance money, or maybe you're a smaller program and a family of 4 children, an infant, toddler, a preschooler, and a school ager, they all leave. Man, that's a significant chunk of your enrollment costs and your tuition costs that you're getting from that family. So if your budget is in the red or you have a deficit, then you need to go back over your spreadsheets and your figures, and you need to find an area where your expenses can be cut. So there's lots of different ways, and that's why I like Gail Jack's books, because she talks about ways that you can do this. Sometimes it's capital improvements. So if you are planning on getting a new roof, well, there goes your roof for this year. Or materials, you're just not going to have as much because, you have your Reggio goals, and it's so wonderful, and you've earmarked all of these beautiful things in the Lakeshore catalog that you wanted to buy. Okay, well, that's gone as well. That's on the back burner until next year. Unfortunately, maybe eliminating support staff positions if you're really in a deficit or in the red, or unfortunately increasing the premiums paid by the staff. So Gail Jack, once again, in Chapter 4, the budget, she has different ideas for ways that you can cut expenses, and then ways that you can create spreadsheets of your expenses and your income in order to see and forecast how your year is going to be budget-wise. So you've written a budget, you've gone through your whole year, you've been tracking your expenses. Now what do you do with all of this stuff? So it might be in Excel, it might be in Quicken, it might be handwritten notes. You need to keep it. It's really, really important. There's a lot of legal requirements as far as tax records, payroll records, and then reporting to different funding agencies that might be giving you money. And then you might also have to report to a board, a corporate office, a foundation, a different government agency or office. So you need to keep all of those records. And then the more that you keep them and look at them, that's going to give you information. Because typically what's hardest about starting up a program is you don't have any kind of background to fill you in on how much it's going to cost. So if you are keeping 7 years of your financial records, then you can look back and say, oh, 3 years ago during the recession, 8 years ago, 7 years ago during the recession, this is what we were spending. This is how difficult it was, so you get a history of how your program is performing financially. But things that you need to keep are check information, bank statements, billing records, payroll records, fundraising money, profit and loss statements, paid time off, and then backing up and saving on hard drives or zip drives, your Excel spreadsheets as well. This sounds so boring. I mean, this is probably the most boring slide that we've gone over so far in our in this whole class, probably. But really, it is important because other people are counting on you. You are providing their income, so you want to be detail-oriented. You need to hold yourself accountable, and you need to make sure that you have a history of what you're spending financially, and also you're keeping track of what you've paid, so that if you ever get audited, you have this bulk of information in which to give them. So many of you right now are working in a state-funded program. So what I've done is I've just kind of outlined a bunch of resources for you within the Department of Education, Child Care Resource Center, and then CalWORKs for different types of subsidized programs and subsidized child care programs. There is a lot of money, $2.4 billion within the CDE, which is in our Child Development Program. And it's a mix of like 80 to 20% federal funds, but there's a bunch of different contracts that are available throughout the state of California and a lot of different money. So if you are looking to receive some income from subsidized students in addition to families who pay tuition, I've included a bunch of resources for you. My only caveat would be that there are lots of different requirements. Not only are you going from licensing from a 22 to 5, there's different different requirements as far as documentation, management, portfolios, how you lesson plan. So there are different requirements if you are moving from a tuition-based to subsidized-based program. So just be aware of that when pursuing state funding if you're not already a state-funded program. So let's say that you're a teacher in the classroom and you want to learn more about funding sources. If you work in an organization or a site that has an enrollment coordinator or accountant, asking if you can assist them or shadow them might be a good way to learn more about this part of the business. Some programs can't allow you to do that. The enrollment coordinator feels that she's too busy or the accountants are too far off site. It doesn't hurt to ask and see if you can make it part of your professional goals to attend conferences, work with accounting, or even if you don't have a large organization, assisting your director maybe during nap times in more of the business side of things and learning more about state funding can be helpful to you. If your program's large enough, maybe they could help you take time to meet with others in different departments or even just in general learn more about your organization. The picture that I have on the left is talking about subsidized childcare, and a lot of the children that are eligible for subsidized childcare don't receive those funds or don't receive that care. So there is a need within our community to provide more state subsidized programs for children who are eligible. So it might be a good way for your director to meet the needs of her community by teaching more staff about funding sources. So as you grow within your organization, you know more about how you can help eligible children. So the federal programs that most of us are familiar with, and I know that many of you have worked with them in the past or are working with them right now, Head Start, Early Head Start, and then migrant education. There used to be a migrant education on Fusat in Oceanside. I do not believe that they are open at this point. The only one that I've seen recently or heard from a colleague was up in Orange County. There's a couple programs. And there were some as well in Valley Center as well. If any of you know about migrant education, that's something I would like to learn more about. So shoot me an email if you know of any migrant education programs. I'd love to reach out to them and see if I can get some more information. But I am familiar with Head Start and Early Head Start. I volunteered for a Head Start down in the South Bay during college, and it was a wonderful experience. They had an amazing garden, and it was just a really, really great program. But I've included some of the websites from the Office of Head Start and then the Office of Child Care, which is then part of the Administration for Children and Families Office. So those are our kind of biggies for our federal funding. And then military child care, they receive funds from the Department of Defense because their employees are either civil servants or they're non-appropriated fund employees, which means they get their money from a different pot of money, typically from Congress. Their staff are typically paid for by the Marine Corps Community Service, but the money to run the centers comes from the Department of Defense. So that's kind of a weird category in that they receive the money to provide military child care from different sources within the federal government. But I do like to bring it up because it is a good option for you who are looking to become mentors, leads, assistant directors, or directors. They have quite a few centers both on Miramar and on Camp Pendleton. So keep that in mind as you're looking for jobs. They typically hire a lot and they always post their job openings on the Marine Corps Community Services MCCS website. So if any of you are looking to make the jump into child care management, keep that on your radar. So I talked about this a couple slides back when the importance of keeping adequate financial records, because when you're starting up your own program, or starting a program at a different site, it's difficult because you don't have previous years to compare it to as a starting point when starting your own annual budget. So you have to estimate costs based on your known income and costs. So if you have know that you're going to have 3 preschool rooms with 1 teacher and 12 teachers, one teacher and 12 children in each classroom, then that's going to roughly tell you how much money is being made from the children and then how much you're going to need to spend on 3 teaching staff. This is something that you're going to have to calculate as far as rate of pay and then tuition costs, and that is going to have to be done fairly broadly and in advance so that you know what you're going to have to pay your teachers in order to start your program. So you're also estimating bare bones costs, like you'll probably know beforehand how much your lease or your mortgage is, but then basic insurance, talking to insurance agents, and then costs of actually buying all of those materials as well, like to supply a classroom, those all need to be estimated in advance. So you know what your initial output as far as expenses, and then each month what you're going to be bringing in, is that going to be covering the cost that you already spent, and is it going to be covering the cost of the staff that you've hired? So what does this budget actually look like? Typically, you're going to be using some kind of online or computer program like Quicken. You can also use Excel spreadsheets. So you would have different spreadsheets for like staff salaries, benefits, expenses. And that's why I've linked to Gail Jack's budgeting chapter, is she shows, I think there's like 15 different budgets in there, and she shows the actual picture of what the Excel spreadsheet looks like. Larger programs that are part of federal or corporate or state and military will have additional paperwork, and then how you submit claims and get your income and expenses paid for goes to various departments or boards. So that's why if you work within state subsidized programs, it can get a little bit complicated, and that's why a lot of programs depend on enrollment specialists to help them navigate that. And then federal program, military programs as well, they have additional paperwork that you have to engage in. So you have this budget, it's in Excel, it's in Quicken, or you have an accounting department, but you have these annual budgets that you've created. Now what do you do with it? A lot of it you keep to yourself. Nobody wants to sit down and look through, pages and pages of Excel spreadsheets. But you might have to report to a funding source, either a board or state or federal government. Then you also need to communicate part of your budget to your employees. They want to know what they're going to be paid. That's part of their job contract. They want to know if they're ever going to get benefits. Is retirement going to be part of this job? So at the beginning of employment, you're signing a job contract, and that includes your rate of pay, and then possibly what kind of benefits or raises they might have later on. And then after that, you are also communicating to them leave benefits, pay information, withholding. It's going to be on every pay stub. And then when raises will happen, if they will happen, and then hopefully your long-term goal is to provide benefits and retirement for all of your employees, how that is going to happen. That's something that you have to take the information that you have as part of your budget, and you need to distill it into something that your employees can understand, because it's affecting their life. It's affecting their livelihood, and it's affecting their lives as well. And then as an administrator, you also need to communicate in writing with parents about tuition. We won't have time to write a child care contract as part of this class. It's a very writing heavy class. There's a lot of things that we have to cover, but you can very easily Google child care contract, or you can meet with a consultant to help you write one. That's going to include when fees and tuition are due, when they're considered late, when disenrollment will happen because of non-payment, and if any auxiliary costs are due, a registration fee, enrollment fee. So those are typically the things that you would include in a child care contract, and it's very important that you communicate late fees and disenrollment and that type of thing, because this is your income. Tuition and the contract is how you are getting your income in order to pay for the costs of your company. So it's really important that it's very effectively communicated to parents so that you are receiving as much tuition as possible. We all want to help families. Unfortunately, I've been in situations where this was on Camp Pendleton, so it's already fairly heavily subsidized by the federal government. Typically, military families pay much less in childcare than they would anywhere else. But we had a family that could not pay for a variety of reasons. We sought out a lot of support for them. They attended financial management classes that they have on base. They met with a financial advisor. They wrote out a budget for the members of their family. It was a larger family. They both worked full-time as Marines. but it was almost impossible for them to pay with any regularity. I don't think a month went by where we got paid regularly what we should. Not to mention never getting paid for late fees, things like that. And eventually, with the help of the chain of command for the two Marines, and then the higher management that I had above us, we had to ask this family to leave. We have a very important mission statement on base, providing childcare for active duty Marines. But in this case, they could not pay, and we could not keep providing a service for them when there was no kind of expectation that we would ever get paid for it. So it does happen. It's always unfortunate. Nobody wants to kick out families because of lack of payment. And most programs will help with support services, getting them CalFresh or SNAP or something like that, WIC, to free up some cash so that they can pay for it, finding state subsidized spots, things like that. So there are services that you can provide. But at the end of the day, if a family is not going to be paying for that spot, then you are going to need to find a family who can pay for it, so that you can continue to pay for your employees and their income. So why is having a working budget so important? First of all, it's going to allow you to make informed decisions about the fiscal health of your program. So are you healthy? Are you bringing in a lot of income that allows you to spend out in your expenses? And then also, are you putting enough money in order to pay yourself, and then also to meet the long-term goals that you have for your program? As an employer, you're responsible for the livelihood of your staff and your employees, and then also providing childcare for the families that use your program. And with this comes tremendous responsibility, and it needs to be matched by your attention to detail when crafting and drafting your budget, and then tracking your expenses throughout the year. So even if you have an accounting department, enrollment coordinators, knowing about your budget, using your money wisely is going to allow your program to grow and to fulfill your vision of education, and take care of your staff accordingly.